I understand why Snake Eater is the favorite. I get why the fans like it. I get why David Hayter didn't hesitate to tell me that Snake Eater was his favorite. I mean, like, you have the in-depth mechanics with the stamina system and having to eat and being able to starve out your enemies, and elemental gameplay, using the water to avoid bees, or, fire waking up bats, or using water to put out fire. The way everything just kind of interacts, in the sense that like you have all these different systems that play into each other consistently. The way Snake Eater just has an incredible pace. The way it's like the closest thing a classic Metal Gear will come to controlling like a more modern conventional game. It's comfortable, it's replayable, it's a amazing game. One of the greatest games of all time, no doubt. I get it. But I still like Metal Gear Solid 2 better.
Tartarus, slap his nuts.
So today I'm Pliskin, and I want to start talking about why Metal Gear Solid 2 just has this special place in my heart, despite acknowledging, just how crazy of a game Snake Eater really is. First things first, let's go ahead and talk about the gameplay. Now, I'm not going to spend too much time on the sandbox since I've talked about Metal Gear Solid 2 sandbox in depth in so many different videos. Basically, the tanker has the second best, sandbox I've ever seen balanced, outdone only by Halo Combat Evolved, and the main game has a decent sandbox, but has some extra features or extra weapons that kind of feel superfluous, or there's certain weapons that could have been implemented better, but all in all, it's pretty solid. When I say gameplay though, I want to talk about, general pacing, the way this feels to play, and certain mechanics and level design elements that I usually don't go over as much as the sandbox. So, first of those things is basically the way this game feels to play. Now again, I understand why everyone prefers Snake Eater. However, I do kind of notice that Snake Eater, although it does it right, harbors one of the main weaknesses I notice in a lot of modern stealth games, and that is the abundance of safety zones in the shape of grass. Now, modern stealth games, I say modern, but it's been like this for decades pretty much, involve you just sitting in a patch of grass, waiting for the enemy to be in the opportune position, and then going out and killing them. Now again, Snake Eater does this better than most by still making you vulnerable in grass and having you, need to use the camouflage system to, really blend in there, and enemies can still walk through if, birds go by and alert them, and then you watch the grass for enemy movement. It's pretty cool, and again, Snake Eater is on a pedestal. However, it does kind of follow into the trend of, I sit here in this safe spot, I take pot shot, and I move on. And a lot of it really is just kind of sitting and waiting, and while that isn't bad by any means, again, Snake Eater, Ghost of Tsushima are games that use grass for stealth, but they do so very well. But Metal Gear Solid 2, I feel like there's more of a forward momentum. You see, as I'm going through these environments and using both my own, view of the environment, the first-person view, and the Soliton radar, I am, doing cartwheels from cover to cover. I'm looking around corners. I'm peeking over things. I'm crawling under things. I'm constantly moving, and I'm constantly noticing the enemy's patterns until I have them memorized. Every room on the big shell and every bridge is a different gimmick that plays with verticality, different kinds of patterns, and different kinds of enemies that you need to approach differently. And after you go through, all of these different struts, and the game makes sure that you go through these struts with the whole part with Peter Stillman and having to defuse the bombs being utilized to make you really get familiar with the environment before the game starts throwing any real challenges your way. which is genius, by the way. I've talked about this before in a really old review I've done of Metal Gear Solid 2. But yeah, like as you get to know these different struts, eventually you find different patterns. You know what the enemies are going to be doing. You know when you go into strut F, you know there's going to be a radio man there. He's constantly going to be calling in, so you need to be on your toes. You know, in just strut A in that main room there, it's just the one guy in a bunch of different cubicles, and he's pretty easy to move around. Each one of these rooms and areas becomes not so much a challenge to overcome, but a flow. And this feeling of flow has a big part in making Metal Gear Solid 2 my personal favorite in regards to gameplay. Because again, while Snake Eater is great, getting to know these environments, getting in that flow, and then having moments where they throw something new into one of these rooms, making me, have to backstep and just panic and try to figure out what I'm supposed to do or how I'm going to get over this, is really addicting and really fun. Then of course we have the variety of the different things you'll be doing. Snake Eater, the majority of the time, I am hiding in grass and I am shooting guys with the MK22 in the head. In Metal Gear Solid 2, while that tranq gun meta is still there and still just as overpowered and issue-ridden as it is in Snake Eater, I'm also using the freeze spray to disable bombs. I am also having to look for nodes to unlock the map to an area. I've compared these nodes that are in each and every room to Far Cry towers, and I stand by that statement. Having that, be a priority, and definitely having an advantage or a disadvantage depending on whether or not you've activated the node, is a big part of Metal Gear Solid 2. And really going out of your way in the beginning to get all these nodes can really help you out in the end game. And, vice versa. If you just kind of take advantage of how easy it is in the beginning, you get really punished for not taking note of these nodes. I'm also forced to use different weapons to take care of cameras and gun ciphers. And, in Metal Gear Solid 3, again, I love this game, but there isn't an enemy that really forces you to use a lethal weapon on them. Whereas in Sons of Liberty, whenever I come across a mechanical obstacle, I either need to have a shaft grenade, or I need to use my suppressed pistols, my assault rifles, or whatever to take it down. There's also Nikita puzzles. I've talked so much before about how these little puzzly elements to Metal Gear were one of my favorite parts of the series. Still are. I'm not sure why I said were there. It is one of my favorite parts of the series. And Snake Eater forwards, these puzzle type elements just don't really show up. Hell, I'd argue one of the best parts of Metal Gear Solid 1 is the Nikita missile launcher. Figuring out that room and then later on figuring out different areas where you could use it to unlock secrets or circumvent certain boss fights that would otherwise be a chore is really freaking cool. And in Metal Gear Solid 2, whether I'm in VR missions or the main game, it feels amazing. So yeah, there's just more different things that I have to do in Metal Gear Solid 2. So that, with the flow, really gives it a leg up over Snake Eater for me. And I know I always rag on about how VR missions are just the best thing ever, but VR missions are the best thing ever. There is so much variety here, from modes that put you in complete darkness, to platforming modes, to fun little mini games. Metal Gear Solid 2 has flow and it has variety. It also has some fairly good boss fights. In the past, I've always said that Metal Gear Solid 3 and 4 have much better boss fights than 2. And for the most part, that's true, but you gotta respect how, you hear about Fat Man and you have to disable his bombs for the entire, first part of the game, and then it's capped off by fighting him, and guess what he does? He places bombs around, so it's a test of how good you are at finding different bombs. The fight against the Metal Gear Rays is perhaps one of the most kinetic in the series, and there's a nice, again, flow to how you fight them. Having to use the Stinger missile, which is a very stationary weapon, and then having to quickly exit out of it to dodge missiles and machine gun fire is really freaking cool. And there's a lot of opportunities here for risk versus reward. The sword fight with Solidus is much more engaging than any CQC battle where you just basically have a quick time event in order to win. And then different AI companions that you can have throughout the game. You have the escort quest with Emma that I actually really like, and does a couple cool, unique things with the swimming. Oh my, I forgot to mention the swimming parts. Like, underwater sections in games are always really cool to me. My favorite environments in games are, like amphibious facilities and, tundras and mountains and snowy areas. And Metal Gear Solid 2 does the aquatic facilities really freaking well. And part of that is in the swimming section, which again is really well paced because at first you're figuring out yourself, and then you have a second time through it, but with the added challenge of getting Emma through it. Of course, you have the whole element of being able to fight alongside Solid Snake, which is really freaking cool. AI companions are usually frustrating or in the background, so having a main character fight next to you is awesome. And also, like, what other game allows me to feed Solid Snake my asshole?
Damn kid.
Now, please don't worry. When I say I'm going to be talking about the story, I don't mean, oh my god, guys, Kojima predicted the future. And like, there's like the internet and oh my god, like liberals, it predicted liberals. Bruh, it predicted liberals. Do you know it tells you to turn the game console off and you were supposed to play Solid Snake, but now you're playing as this guy. No, like, honestly, I feel like that kind of shit's been done to death on YouTube. But I do want to talk about the story a little bit. Whereas I don't think comparing Metal Gear Solid 2's narrative to contemporary politics is too relevant. I think the fact that Fukushima basically illustrated the dead internet theory, which basically suggests that the internet that we, use every day is mostly inhabited by bots that are trying to sell us or convince us of certain things as a means of control and coercion, is pretty cool to see in a game released in 2001. I also want to talk about how Solid Snake's motivations are like really good for an antagonist, because the guy's a bastard. Like, he carries himself like an absolute douche and does terrible things, but at the same time you know where he's coming from. And I think, again, with the whole idea of the narrative applying to a lot of the contemporary issues today, a lot of people could probably resonate with the feeling of, having your destiny, having your life be out of your own hands, having your history, your options cut short, being defined by things you have no control over, and getting very frustrated and wanting to fight back against that is totally contemporary to, life right now, where all this crazy shit is happening and so many of us feel powerless to change it, and it's very easy to give in to the anger that comes from that. So yeah, Solidus is a really cool villain and a really good Metal Gear villain, and he fits the narrative so well, and I wish the series did more with him instead of bringing back Liquid for all this kind of shit. Like, yeah, I'm not gonna go down that road. Raiden as a main character is very easy to, put yourself in his shoes. He was supposed to be like a mockery of the fan base, or as, how Kojima saw the fan base back in like 2001, so the average Y2K American gamer, I guess. But for me, I can relate to Raiden in so many different ways. The, troubled relationship, the being a product of growing up in the digital age and trying to force yourself into a mold of something that you can't really be and something you don't really want to be, and then having to come to grips with who you actually are and what you actually want and the things you actually want to choose in a world where so much of that is automated for you is really difficult. And I don't know, seeing a character struggle through this really resonated with me. On that note, Metal Gear Solid 2's usage of full motion video, again, full motion video in a game from 2001, that's not really, like in the 90s that was a lot more popular, but 2001, that's still pretty whoa. And I like how they were used in the sense that, like, when you're snapping back to reality, when the game is over, or when you're having moments, where, you know, the characters are just talking about real shit, like trying to live in the digital age, trying to make sense of all these things, you know, choosing your own future. It shows footage of just actual people, actual life. And yeah, that juxtaposition between, you know, the weird and the fantastical being portrayed in the game's graphics, but then, you know, the real shit and the real messages the game is trying to send being portrayed in full motion video is a neat touch, and I really appreciate that. And then of course you have the really cool thing where you get to see Solid Snake as his own character, his relationship with Otacon, how he interacts with other people. You get to see that firsthand by seeing him through Raiden's eyes. It's all really cool. This game's narrative is really well done. And while a lot of the writing and voice acting is very cheesy by today's standards, the base narrative of the game and the way it handles a lot is pretty freaking good.
Check.
Now, the last thing I want to mention are the vibes. Now, the vibes is a very general topic, but there's a lot to go into here that gets really specific. So first off, let's talk about the vibes with the locations. I love the juxtaposition between like the warm orange hues of the big shell and then the cold blue hues of the tanker and arsenal gear. Like when you're in these colder environments, it feels hostile. You feel tense, like you need to be careful when you're moving around. But then when you're in these like warmer orange environments, you still have that tension from the stealth, but there is an undeniable comfort to it. Now again, Snake Eater, I understand that graphically it's technically the better game, but there's something really pretty about these outdoor areas, the seagulls, the sunlight, the ocean. Again, that warm orange. The sound design and the visuals all come together to create something that feels very unique to Metal Gear Solid 2. And this was characteristic of the start of the 6th generation of consoles, where developers were still trying to figure out how these things should look now that they have more processing power, that you got a lot of games where you got these really unique areas. And yeah, I just wanted to share just how pretty Metal Gear Solid 2 can be. Also, the music in this game here knocks Snake Eater and anything else in the series completely out of the water. Just listen to these different ambient tracks. The last thing I want to bring up that really makes Metal Gear Solid 2 feel special is that because it released in 2001 and dealt with very real topics that were relevant both to the pre-9/11 world and the post-9/11 world, it kind of acts as this really weird time capsule that encapsulates that shift from the 20th century to Y2K. Y2K and the whole panic around that even being brought up in the game. So having something that simultaneously feels like it's from the old world while still feeling very relevant to the new world is not something I can really spot in any other game. It is like that perfect moment in time in history where, you know, the world where our parents kind of raised us to live in just died off, and then the world we're living in now and we're all going crazy trying to deal with was just starting. And you really get that sense in this game, especially when you go, you know, to the meta narrative and you learn about the original plot and how 9/11 influenced the game. and then when you play the game again, like, you really start to feel it. It's just, Metal Gear Solid 2 is unique. If you're gonna forget everything I've said, remember that. There is nothing like Metal Gear Solid 2 out there, and that's probably why it's my favorite Metal Gear game. Anyways, this has been Pliskin. Over and out.
This is Solid Snake. Hey, subscribe to Pliskin Boy. God damn it.
You heard him.